Amy, thank you for joining today. This is awesome. I love it.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm
Absolutely.
so excited.
So we were talking about creativity. So creative in its truest form, and it's the mundane form, the small, the big, and everything in between. So it's a pretty big subject matter. Like, I think even when we talk about creativity, I think that kind of triggers somebody's idea of, okay, it's a starving artist or a musician or something big and bold. And I think that sometimes we don't even realize maybe there's not a sense of ownership into it somehow, or we can explore this. But I was going to say maybe it even falls into certain worthiness or whatever that is. But it shows up in, honestly, I feel that the most beautiful creativity shows up in the smallest ways. Like, and it really just tiny little ways. Even if you're doing something for the kids, I don't know, blueberry pancakes or something. I'm trying to think of something very simple. Cooking or activities, and not just with the kids, every aspect. Starting it there, can you see some places in your life that it might show up in different aspects?
Yeah, and I'd love to share that because I have to admit, when I first was contemplating the word of creativity, I was questioning, do I have it? Where does it show up? And I realized children, especially young children, maybe you don't question it. It's there, and
it's just inherent.
And it's natural, and it flows, and it's accepted.
Sure.
I don't think there's too much judgment. And so then applying that now, like trusting that I do have it.
Yeah.
And remembering that I do have it and that we do all have it. And so I did start to look at my life and my work where I see it peaking and blooming, really, which I hadn't really thought about before.
I love it. You got a list. Perfect. Yes, I like that.
Yeah. So the first, most obvious to me, I'm a yoga instructor and a group fitness instructor. And I really love that is just in many places free reign for creativity. There's certain classes where you must do X, Y, Z.
I would imagine there's a structure. You probably have to hit certain, maybe I'll call them parameters, but I would imagine too is based, and this is me asking you because I'm not a trainer. I don't know what that's, or even forming a class in that sense. Do you have some windows of malleability based on the class or the energy that's in the class? If you have a class that everybody's tired and dragging versus everybody's come all pumped up, I would imagine there's a tone or a conscious collective to the different environments. So do you have some windows where you can be a little bit flowy or flow state like?
Yeah, even in classes that are a little more structured, I do. You read the room, you read what maybe they want, but you may have poured a lot of creativity in your class design or your planning, and then a different energy walks into the room. And you're like, oh, okay, this is different. And so having that window or that freedom to be creative in the moment, and that's actually where I wrote down creativity in class design is awesome and fun and challenging and exciting. Ask anyone. I'm very into themes for my classes.
All right, cool.
So the moves and the music and the words I'm going to say and the introductory quote, I love to theme classes out, but I just get so excited in the moment when I'm creative. Like when I am in the middle of class and the song comes on and the beat is a certain beat and the people are just feeling it, and then I make a course correction or just make a change because I'm like, or have a brand new idea. Brand new idea I didn't plan, but I get it in the moment and we go with it. And that I just wrote down, that makes me feel alive. It charges me up. That's
a really cool tie-in. Thank you for sharing that, because that is what is the emotion that invokes in the creative moment too. It's funny because I talk so much about creativity and that's a total correlation, but that's everything. It is the response that you would receive from that moment. And I think what's cool about what you're saying too is, yes, there's an idea to set out the course, but being malleable and being flexible enough, but also I would say a certain allowance and trust in your own ability to connect those or allow that to flow where you might be going to connect back where you do have a plan. And you're in maybe some of its cadence, some of its timing in this scenario. And obviously this is all translatable to a lot people would do all the time, even in work situations or communications and everything. But I do love that you made that connection where you feel alive. You feel charged by that moment of something that's not just rigid or overly planned. Yeah. And that's cool. I would imagine, and I hear it because I always want to be careful never to generalize. I just wonder how many trainers do that, or how many are not overly planned, but just planned to the second? I wonder what the difference is there, because I'm sure people have you probably worked with a lot of different trainers. Can you tell if somebody is in their flow state or kind of flowing with it, or if they're really rigid?
I guess I'm not going to speak specifically to trainers, more I'm going to broaden it.
Okay, perfect.
When just anyone, I'm going to try to think of an example, but when you see someone, whether it's at a conference and they're presenting, or it's a teacher, for me, a lot of times an instructor in the middle of a class, or whatever, and you're just like, they are a channel, and they were born to do this, or they're in the flow. They are in the, and it's just so beautiful to watch. Yeah. So I do love you can see it, and it's just absolutely magical. It's
I think there's certain people maybe do like breath work courses, and they're doing certain meditations or a prayer, and you can tell that they're truly flowing with that communication, that it's not something that was pre-scripted. I know what you're saying. I guess you could translate it to music too, something like like a jazz, or where they're really just riffing through it, and obviously. They have the skills, they already have the fundamentals, and at some level, there's an organic flow that's happening, and they're feeding off of each other. And honestly, it actually, even to keep jumping, it happens in conversations all the time. That's conversations. Mm-hmm. They start somewhere, maybe you want to, but even to what we're doing right here is just, there's a malleability in a flow into that. Yeah, and I say flow even like more of a watery sense of flow.
Yeah.
Rather than a flow state.
Yeah. Actually, I thought of the most recent thing where I'm like, it was, it's going to sound silly, but I think it's James Corbin. Is that the late night?
Oh, yeah.
Whatever. He's British.
I think. Comedian?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
James Corbin, something like that. He does these, I don't even know what they're called, car karaoke, and he gets like famous people in the car.
And they sing their song in karaoke.
And he's driving. Yes. So I've watched a few of them, but most recently I watched a Broadway themed one. It was Manuel Lynn Miranda was in the front seat, and there were 3 people in the back seat, all people that were currently on Broadway, and you would recognize them all. And so the 5 of them are singing different Broadway songs, and the song from Rent, Seasons of Love, came on.
Okay.
And just, it was like, I started crying. It was just like, they all did their own thing. Like, they added their own, like, harmony and beat and whatever. You could just tell they were flowing off of each other, the energy. And it was just like, I was like, oh my God. And I like shared it with a bunch of people. It just was like, that's that moment where they're like, they're in that flow. They were born to do that. They were born to sit in a car.
You know what's interesting?
Doing Broadway
musicals. You were telling me that story, and what kind of is like popping into my head a little bit, and it's almost a word that you said when you first started talking about creativity, with it being a child, and you threw out the word judgment. I don't remember the total context of where you did it, but I'm just going to hang on the word of judgment. Something like that too is where you trust. Again, you're trusting your ability, but you almost are outside of judgment. You're outside of the concern of the world.
Yeah.
And the talents that you already have or innately have. We are all talented, expanded human beings and spirits having human experience. And we have that ability to go beyond the scope of maybe even what we know is capable. So like there's a sense of predictability in those because you have the trust. You're not concerned about judgment. You're not concerned about that surrounding. And it's not that you don't care. You care. You're deeply into it. You're deeply enjoying it. But it's almost the concern isn't even a thought. There's no thought into it.
There's no thought.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, I know we keep saying a lot of the same things, but it is really a beautiful state to see it, or even better, to be in that state and feel it. And I think sometimes too is when we get really lost in those types of atmospheric or actionable arenas, I think you lose track of time. I'm getting lost in the thought there myself, just remembering some different aspects of it. But
hey, that's a whole other thing we talk about.
Timelines, exactly, which I did want to bring up with you too. So I cut you off. So you had a list because one of them was I'll call it the training, or the coaching, or and then that's in a physical capacity. So physical fitness, world training, health, body, and then I know you have connection points to body, mind, spirit. So spirit in the sense of past life regression work, which is really super cool. And I almost want to have another conversation with you, literally just about that.
Okay.
But
That'd be
tell
awesome.
me where a little bit does the same similar, and I don't want to oversimplify it and say does a similar thing happen to that in where there's a flow of a river flowing versus the flow state. But you tell me just a little bit more what that is and your thought process.
Yeah. So and with the training, the creativity showing up in the training in both the class design and in the moment, I was like, wow, creativity helps me inspire people. So
Okay.
that in that
Yeah.
vein, or that kind of jumped out at me, which I thought that was cool. But then in the regression work, I do have kind of a structure and a plan.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wrote in my notes was creativity in regressions and regression work feels holy.
Oh, okay.
It feels
I love that.
holy, and it just, I'm led. The creativity is leading me to my aim is to heal,
Yeah.
and there's just
and that's the word healing is what you were saying that was the word that was coming to me, healing. But I love the word holy too, because that is a very
it just feels, and it's something I've had to build that trust in that I do have that creativity driven by spirit, by intuition, and just like in Star Wars, at the very end of the first movie, when they're saying to Luke Skywalker, stay on target, and then Obi-Wan is, use the Force.
Yeah.
And Luke turns off the machine, and it like goes away, and everyone's like, what are you doing?
Which is great, because he turned off the dependency. So, and I attribute that, what you're saying there too, is putting your energy outside of yourself. The dependency of putting your energy somewhere outside of yourself. Either on, in that case, technology, okay, because there's a metaphor and all that too, but I would say too, maybe in others or in other situational, or placing your energy on some other dependency. So let me back up a little bit and I'll come to that point, but you're going in with intention. You have a practice that you've studied for a very long time with the past life regression. Yeah. But you know that if you're working with another human being that's a complex creature in their own right, so what's worked for maybe you or a specific path that maybe worked for you or another, I don't call it client, call it person you're working with, whatever, is not going to work for maybe the next person. So you have to probably, this is me assuming, so you can tell me I'm wrong or right or whatever it is and add to it. But I would imagine maybe you have waypoints. I always to think of the waypoints as a lighthouse in the distance. You're like, I'm heading that way. But how we navigate the wind or the waves or the currents is how we have to do that, or where that allows us to take it. But we're going to head towards that point. Maybe even if we don't hit the waypoint necessarily, where this takes us is you trust that it's beautiful. You trust that it's going to take somewhere of an open mind, open heart, and where it's meant to be for that person, because you're working with that person and they're healing. So you're a guide. And I've been feeling a lot of assumptions in there. So please tell me if there's something I'm looking at that, or I'm misinforming about terminology or anything.
I love this image of the waypoints and the chartering.
You have wind, you have the currents, the tides. Yeah. So it's not that those are resistance points. They're something you're working with. I'm trying to think of maybe the words that would be, or you're flowing. The word flowing keeps coming up, but you're helping to guide, steer, and navigate the wind that's, I don't want to say out of your control, but wind is, we don't control the wind. We don't control the currents. Yeah. That energy is so much larger than us. So you're working with it, or you're harnessing it, or whatever the forming of words around that. Is that a fair assessment? I think that was just how I was thinking about it. And
that's what I've experienced in all the trainings I did with, I'll do the little plug for my teacher, Dawn Grace Kelly in New Zealand. She's amazing.
Oh, very cool.
Done many hundreds and hundreds of hours of training with her with this core group. And we have our plan and we work on each other, and we keep going. Initially, the students kept going back to Dawn and been like, what would you have done when things don't go exactly? And you're a new student, you're learning. And she might share, or she oftentimes within the training, but also as we did case studies, we would send our work to her and she would give us feedback. So both in the case studies and in the live training, she would be like, oh my God, that was so beautiful. The choice you made to do X.
Yeah.
We were all expecting Y because that's,
absolutely.
But Amy, you did this, or Tony, you did this, or Emily, you did this. And so then we all saw, oh,
it's not a fixed.
Yeah. And we saw that Emily's choice was beautiful and it was off script or off the plan.
Yeah.
And so then I think it helped us build confidence.
Yeah. That's really cool because that gets into really good mentorship because you really, there's a couple different things I'll say too, because there's just as far as like a mentorship, there's one is that you want, again, you don't want to assume what people want, but I was going to say is there's a sense of the student surpassing the mentor and allowing that student to strengthen in their own ways and their own beauties, not trying to embolden here. If I'm going to mentor you on something, you're not me to be the strongest you in this environment or in this practice. So a true mentor or a good teacher is going to help you accentuate your greatest strengths within the environment. But obviously they're going to give you some guidance. But I was thinking of something else too, is I know sometimes too is like a newbie will say a rookie is going to come in and they're going to want that paint by numbers because they're a little insecure. They're not sure how to connect the dots. Or am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? There's a lot of concern in that and stuff too. And I would imagine, I don't know that exactly. Another training mentoring is sometimes you can't give an exact answer anyways, because you don't have all the context clues or you don't have all the pieces of data. Again, if you're working with human beings, it's not a machine. So you're not working with a machine where it's a very binary scenario. But if you're working with, and it's like, then you have to build this, I always like to call it the decision tree. You're like, if this, then that, if this, then that. But then how do you seek that? Imagine a good mentor or teacher that be able to help build that around somebody's either inherent abilities or help to draw those out and those talents. And I imagine too, something like with a past life regression, that energy work, I'm just trying to think, do you feel like, and this, I guess this is the question, is do you feel like some of that was instinctual? Do you feel like some of it was the practice that brought it out? Or was it like the reverse? Is it it was there and then, or you had to develop it? It was never there? Yeah, I don't know. What is your view on some of that?
Oh gosh. I just had a vision, or in my mind, I saw like, in response to the new person that wants the paint by number, but also, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Sure.
I kind of feel like in everything, structure allows for love.
Okay.
Structure allows for creativity. Structure allows for the flow. And it almost seems contradictory, structure and flow. Right. But I feel like, I feel as humans, we need some grounding and we need some, I can count on this, or I start here. This is in my own life in multiple ways. I've just found that sometimes structure can feel inhibiting to me.
For sure.
If I don't agree with the structure.
Sure, but it can feel constricting.
Constricting, yeah.
I love this. We were discussing, I'll use the word discipline. I think you might have used structure, and I was going to play with the word discipline, but so creativity either coming from, or I'll say birthing from, or evolving, or being allowed in discipline. And I have a bunch of thoughts on this too, but I actually would like to hear you were going with this. And so you start that out, or you pick up where we left off.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I know that my personality, I traditionally have been a rule follower and a people pleaser. So I like to know the rules. Are you a recovering
people pleaser? All right, perfect. I love it.
There have been times where I've felt hindered by, not even my creativity, just my personality. Like I felt hindered by either rules, structures, discipline, and felt like I couldn't be creative, couldn't be myself, etc. But I'm now just recently seeing how like discipline, and I'll pull back that word structure, helps creativity blossom.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like the word creativity and discipline seems opposed.
Sure. Absolutely.
How can you be creative? Okay, it's time to be disciplined. We are going to be creative now. Yeah. It's time to be creative. Right. You can be creative under the gun like that. It feels like a juxtaposition, but what I've been finding in my teaching, in the regressions, but also I've been just third eye kind of seeing it in the world, that without discipline and without some structure, I think creativity or the flow doesn't have the potential to get to its full beauty because it's watered down. maybe a little, it's widened. But when you have either the structure of, the simple example is a class, a yoga class. I have my, like, you have your sunbees, I do the tweeners, I do core, etc., whatever, the map I have, that actually helps me become super creative because I'm anchored there. I know that's where I'm starting. Yeah. And within that structure, I have so much room to be creative. So without that structure, I think I'd be overwhelmed. I'd be like, like I have a book at home, 1,001 yoga asanas. So if you had no structure and you were like, I have 1,001 things I could do, what am I going to do? Like, that's too
option
much.
Overload.
Yeah. But I also like the word discipline that you started with. In my mind, I see discipline as continuing to come back after failure or after boredom or after injury or after whatever the word is, disappointment, having that discipline to keep coming back. And whatever you're doing, work, I'm thinking with teaching, for me, I've seen it over the past decade, just the discipline of showing up every day and giving my all every day. Like, I'm just seeing how I can be so much more creative because I've built the muscles, I've done the discipline, I've done the hours and hours and hours. And so now that discipline is allowed for me to become more creative. For sure. And I find that with regressions as well. I know the structure and I've done it a whole lot of times. So then I do have that. It's there for me as a takeoff point and a place to return. But then that discipline, that working over and over, that commitment leads to creativity. And flow, and I don't know, just your inner light coming out.
Oh, I love that. I do. There's a ton in what you just said. So I was picking up, just leapfrogging from the discipline. So the discipline or the practice, showing up. I think what you were touching on and where I was picking up from what you were saying was that you're creating a safe space because it's something you can depend on. So the environmental changes, that's what we can do as humans. It's our superpower. We can change our environment. And so you have a time frame, so you can depend on it. You know I'm there at that time. You have space, the physical space. You're in this physical space that you've been before many times. I can depend on it. I know where. And then there's in this case, we're talking about maybe a lesson plan, or if it's in some other case, a practice. Or even if it's a redundancy in a work situation that we do every single day, you have the mental capacities, the emotional capacities, feel safe in those environments because it knows what to expect. So, oh God, you really touched on, there was a word you used that I wish I could remember, but maybe it'll come out as we're talking here. And so now that the body, the physical space, the mind, the cognitive mind, can relax in that sense. It's not there's no primal root fear that's built in there. You're not being chased by a velociraptor. You're just here. I was trying to think of something obscure. And is now that you're in the allowance. So the allowance gives you that window. And I think that's a really fascinating way to see. And when this is where I think you're on the other side, there's the chaos. There's no anchor points. You mentioned anchor point too. And that's the familiarity, that's the ease, that's the peace in that. Because you can release the concerns with some of these other aspects of the other fears, of the physical fears, or the I'm being attacked emotionally, mentally, verbally, whatever the is. You created these areas. There's a quote, and I've said it before when I'm talking to people sometimes, and I butcher it every time. But the relative one it was a writer, and basically said, I'm creative every day, but it starts at 9 a.m. every morning. So it starts when I sit down to write every time. Anyways, totally what you want. But the essence of it is the showing up, and I believe too is creating that space. Now, if you structure your life, use the word entrepreneur, which is a very watered down word, companies, different aspects and different influences. And in those chaos states, I have experienced there's a form of creativity because I've placed myself in uncomfortable environments on that other side. But I would say that there is a frenetic aspect to it too. In this sense, I don't mean to make this about me, but I'm comfortable with chaos. So I can still keep the mind calm and the stoic, but I lose the anchor points because I'm somewhere I've never been before. to what I like about what you're saying is you can create the structure or the discipline or the practice built around that. And I maybe depend on creativity. And I'm sure there's levels. There's sometimes you can be affected by how much water you drink that way. I mean, there's a lot of things that can feed into it. But so there might be different levels. Now, I will say too is I think what I wanted to touch on was also the structures. I am very averse to structure. I don't know, just maybe a work environment or being stuck even in a classroom or something for an extended period of time. Like thinking about going back as a kid or something, that imaginary thing, I'd be like just stuck on the desk. But I think when it's a sense of it's not your path or you're not, and that there's something to there too. So you're living on somebody else's dreams or somebody else's path. I think that's when you can feel lost. Now I'm digressing path off our course a little bit, but I think the structure isn't. It's. I think there's an identification of what's structured and what's not because I think that sometimes what you're saying is we embrace the structure, and there's other times that same structure can be very rigid and uncomfortable and prickly for somebody else. That same scenario. So I think the recognition, or when you get into dedication, love, and how much you want to seek this and master or really embrace or explore. But again, veering off a little bit far under the deep end of that pool is really coming back to it, finding and what is that allowance of creativity. So I think staying with that is a fascinating thing. And I know that myself, I wonder if I push some of that away sometimes because of my aversion to structure. So there's a little bit of self-sabotage that can happen in that too.
Ooh, wow. Yeah.
So the allowance of the discipline or the aversion to the discipline or that idea might, I don't know, I'm just playing with that. Jumping on some of those thoughts, I guess word is, obviously we've all felt stipend and sort of compressed or suppressed in certain structural environments, but I don't know, I think we can come through those.
Yeah, I'm going to simmer on what you just said for a while.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
It spoke to me, it hit home a bit, especially the word self-sabotage.
We're very good creatures at that. Humans are very good at, yes.
So good at that. But yeah, I think it's interesting how you said like structure when it's not your
your structure. So if you're on somebody else's dream path, you're on their, or I don't know, I'll just associate it with somebody else's company, some company they built or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're building that, essentially you have buy-in, you're excited about it, there's giving, but I'm going to take this down a little bit far, maybe a little bit on the extreme side, but I go back to that kind of giving your power to somebody else's dreams, giving your power away to somebody else's life path. And it's not that, I don't want to say, it's not that diabolical or nefarious word, but, but I think there's times where we do that. And then you go into kind of, why are you doing it? Are you seeking rescue or are you seeking safe haven or whatever, there's different reasons that motivate us to be in those situations. But I think there is something too, for sure, when you're on building somebody else's path. I will say one thing too, is there is that sometimes there can be a fear of success and I've noodled with this fear of success before, because I think sometimes people, it's not necessarily I think in the traditional mindset, oh, I've got a bunch of cash in my bank, I succeed. It's not the fear of that, it's the fear of the responsibility of that.